Yeah.
Well, let's start her up now. How about that? We're at 9:36. We'll start with just sort of a general roll call to see who is on the call, get introductions. First of the, let's just get a count of the committee members. How about that? And let's see here, who has either Laura or Melissa, could you do that?
We have Kevin Jewell,
Here.
Jeff Kennedy, and Jeff Thompson. And then we're admitting Troy Lowell right now. And all that's left is Scott Leverins. He may join later. And that's it. For the
Okay, so let's get started here then. We are going to be doing chapter 4 on ventilation and also the Appendix C natural gas sections, the last bits. We were thinking we were going to have a fairly deep discussion on ventilation because of the proposals 2201 and 2203 and the effects on other parts of the code and interaction with the structural code. Well, yesterday at the Building Code Structures Board, moving forward with the next building code and looking at chapter 12 and natural ventilation, we've come to there was a motion that was passed yesterday at the Structures Board about asking the division to develop a review committee to look at all the multiple pieces that are involved in looking at multifamily housing ventilation, both from the natural and mechanical standpoint, and the impacts on energy, because it affects not just the Building Code Structures Board, it affects low-rise housing covered under the Residential and Manufactured Structures Board. It affects the energy code because there's a lot of interaction there as well, and also our code that we're looking at today. So they have, the division is going to be putting together a work group to look at what is appropriate for working in the ventilation requirements for dwelling units in commercial structures covered under the structural code. So with that, the proponent for proposals 2201 and 2203 has shown support for that as well. So we're going to be recommending to the committee today that this will be taken pretty much off the schedule for those two proposals. We'll try and make it so we do some minor cleanup on chapter 4 today regarding multifamily housing, but we will be putting together, again, the committee can still do as they see fit, but we're going to try, and the division will be recommending again to both this committee and to the mechanical board when they review this work that, you know, we will be looking at developing a code review committee to come up with language that takes into account all of the boards that are involved, the energy impacts, the ventilation impacts, costs involved, since we are looking at, you know, anything that happens in this code that affects low-rise apartments also gets reviewed by the residential board as well. We can, if there are questions, I'd be happy to take some of them now, but if not, we can dive in on the matrix items.
Really quick, Mark, before we dive in on the matrix items, I want to do a quick review on the fiscal side of things, just to sort of refresh everyone's memory. And in case anybody has any thoughts on where we left off on the last one, hopefully this will be the most you hear from me all day. I'm on the policy side, so the fiscal impact tends to be where I come into in terms of the rule adoption. I'll be writing that up, and so which is why I keep pestering you for this information. Just a refresher, we're looking for any sort of cost increase, cost decrease, process increase, process decrease in terms of either state and local governments or industry and small business. In particular with industry and small business, if it is going to impact someone, we'd be very interested in any thoughts or estimates on the type of business or industry that's going to be impacted and the number of small businesses impacted in there. Any sort of information on that, even if it's just sort of a back of the envelope best guess, would be helpful. And again, it's either specific cost increases or decreases or something that's less obvious or less tied to a specific number, but it might be something along the lines of if something might require an additional inspection or something like that. Might not necessarily be like an actual bill attached to it, but it's definitely a fiscal or economic impact on someone. So we'd love to hear about all that. I'm just going to quickly run down the items we pulled out from the last meeting that had fiscal or economic impacts. There was 5-1, which was manicure and pedicure station exhausts, continuous operation when building is occupied, and that was no more than $200 parts and labor. I think it was per chair on that. Then there was 5-7, grease duct test or other approved test. And it could provide additional flexibility for building departments, even if it wasn't necessarily a specific cost impact related to that one. 6-1, pipe and duct insulation. It's potentially have a cost impact, but it would depend on the improved insulation brands. 8-1, blocked vent switch for oil fired appliances. It would add costs for those fuel oil appliances. Ammonia refrigeration systems, 11-1. This was not a fiscal and economic impact, but it was flagged as something that you guys wanted to come back to. So I just wanted to bring that up as well. And then finally, 11-4, refrigeration piping was definitely identified as a fiscal impact, and it was flagged as something the group will think about and come back to with some potential fiscal specifics. So if you have any additional thoughts on that, I would love to take note of them. But that is everything from the last meeting. If you can remember back to October, I had to go back and look at my notes to pull everything together. So. And that's everything I have, except I will occasionally be busting in and potentially interrupting you and asking if there is any sort of fiscal and economic impact to what we're discussing.
At what point in the agenda do we deal with those items from chapter 11?
That's up to you guys. I don't know, Mark, if there's a natural point in how you're planning on running through the matrix that it would make the most sense to circle back to that, or if it's the type of thing that would make the most sense to do now. It's up to the committee and Mark as facilitator, I suppose.
So as facilitator, why don't we get those pieces, anything that was held over what we call old business, out of the way? Would that, if that's okay with the group, sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down? I think that would be better to seeing thumbs popping up. Jeff, Troy, work those out of the way now. Let's go through the back items again. Again, Andy, if you can bring them up, we can.
Yeah, the two that I had follow up are the first one is 11-1, ammonia refrigeration systems. And it wasn't flagged as a fiscal impact, but it was flagged as something that we're going to return to.
All right. And if we can bring up chapter 11.
It's basically paragraph 1101.1.2, right?
Correct. So what we're looking at is the ammonia pieces used to be spread out through the refrigeration code and saying, well, unless you're ammonia, go to IAR. So getting a clarification up front that the requirements for ventilation, et cetera, are set for refrigerants except for ammonia in Chapter 11. If it has to do with ammonia, we're now relying on the IAR 2, 3, 4, and 5 systems.
And this is coming in from the model code, I take it?
Yes, this is model code. I can.
That's fine. I mean, while I like having things embedded in the code itself, so I don't have to go buy or look for more references, when those references are the standard, it's better just to refer to them. I mean, the structural code does that extensively.
And what I am going to do is, I'm
And
waiting
the
for
proposal here is just to completely remove that paragraph.
the item is really to recognize just that in the model code, they have essentially moved everything that has to do with ammonia to the
Okay.
IIAR standard.
Okay.
Is really what happens. And
All right.
I was hoping to try and bring up our current and go to Chapter 11 and see the total number of times that ammonia's
How much?
So under current code, it's found first in 1106. And if you could, it pretty much says the same thing. You're looking at this except as modified by, pretty much says ammonia refrigeration systems shall comply with ASHRAE 15 IAR2. It's going strictly to IIAR now. And then if you could just do a real quick word search and just show how many times ammonia under the old code would, how many times that would show up in Chapter 11, just start.
Youch.
Lots of times. So this is going to kind of simplify the language as we go through Chapter 11 is one of the benefits of, and if you could just go down to a few of them, you'll find that it says, it's sort of, except they have to wind up keep putting in exceptions, except for ammonia, except for ammonia.
And why are we trying to take this out?
So really everything falls under the IIAR standard. So that's the that's
I get.
essentially the
So
that's
yeah,
essentially the
So they're
standard for how
throwing it
you
all
read
onto
things.
the. Yeah, I get it. They're throwing it all onto the standard instead of just putting it through scattered through the code book.
You keep going back to it, and what they're having to do is also try and bring in the IIAR language.
Right.
And every time they change their standard, you have to catch up here as well to make sure you're not in conflict. And you getting the question as the code official, well, IIAR says do X, but the code is giving an exception to say
Yeah.
Y.
Yeah.
I mean,
Keeping track of language.
it
All right.
makes-
Conflict of interest. I get it.
it makes sense just to reference it, and
Yeah. If they're
because you know it's
changing.
always going to be updated.
Right.
especially since it's so specialized. I mean, I know there's a lot of ammonia in use out there, but it's a very specialized field, and the folks that deal with it know it. So,
Correct.
So with that, to the committee, on 1025, we had an approve. Are we okay with this as continuing to move forward as an approve now?
I'm good.
Likey.
Good here.
I think that was unanimous.
I'm not able to, unfortunately, don't have everybody, all the secret squares up to see the thumbs going up, but I will take it as is there anyone who would be against it? Speak now. That'll be easier. And hearing nothing, let's move on to the next piece that Andy had.
All right, the only other one I had was also in chapter 11. So it's chapter 11 dash 4. It's the refrigerant piping item. And this one was, it was flagged as a fiscal and economic impact, but folks were going to come back and do some homework and come back with some estimates in terms of what type of impact that would have.
And again, this is to align with the model code, right?
Yes, these are strictly changes to the model code. None of these are organ amendments at this point.
I mean, this looks virtually impossible to gauge from a fiscal impact. It's
Extensive.
yeah, extensive, and also it's like, well, does it really change that much?
Do we have our contractor here today?
I don't think so. I think one difference was stop valves.
Let's get that number up and shown. 11.
Oh, 11-4.
1109.8 is and they aren't listing that as a substantive change in the
Doesn't really say a lot, does it?
I was hoping to have the contractor here today to go over things that, they have to go through brazing training and like to see whether there's anything that seems out of the ordinary.
Mhm.
That wouldn't be part of their normal training and field operation. That's
You see anything in there about valves?
stop valves are covered in 1109.8.3
Yeah, I
Oh, okay.
saw
and 9.8. Those are the,
that.
but not in the substantive change document.
Okay.
They don't
Stop
mention
valve
that
support.
specifically. And scroll up to 9.8, 1109.8. And this is for larger, it appears to be triggering, for really large systems.
Yeah. I was thinking about VRF boxes and whether there's a requirement to put the stop valves on those heat exchange boxes or not.
And if you add 9.8.1, you're going to be potentially more than 6.6 pounds if it's a big multi-head system, possibly,
Mhm.
but
Right.
it does not include, so it's at the compressors and the outlets of liquid receivers. So it wouldn't affect a VRF system.
Yeah, this is more for system maintenance than convenience on connecting extra fan coils or something like that. Okay.
It looks like you have to have 100 pounds before you get into the condenser side. And as far as brazing, I think
You have to have a
Work.
brazing certificate anyways, don't you?
yeah.
Yes, my comment was more toward, this is probably putting, some of the installation pieces here are probably outlined in your brazing certificate.
Yeah.
Requirements anyway. This would be standard practice for.
It's standard practice. They should be submitting that documentation for their submittals.
So. Any general feeling that there's a significant or reportable cost with this?
Well, I mean, I think there were stop valves requirements before. And I think they even apply to the same size, at least the 6.6 pounds. But I think there might be some additional that were required in this language. But I mean, we're talking a little ball valve, right? Or even a plug valve.
Spill valve.
So on a larger system, I don't have the previous language in front of me, sorry. Is that something you can orchestrate, Mark?
I'm currently doing a word search.
Okay.
So in current code, it is, yeah, there it is, 1107.8.
So this is
And
actually
so-
more stringent. It says,
Well, you already have to put them on with 6.6 pounds. They're just
Yeah.
saying additional ones for 100, over 100.
right,
And that's covered
Well-
in 7.8.1.
Right.
right.
So on the receivers, and so I don't think we're seeing a major
don't see
change
it.
in number.
I'd say overall, generally, it doesn't look like it's going to change a whole lot, unless you're working at strictly in refrigerant systems that have over 100 pounds of refrigerant.
All right, so from the committee, are we seeing that, comparing to the 1107.8 language, are we seeing a potential change in cost or probably remaining in the same region?
It looks like generally it's going to be staying the same. It doesn't look like that's going to kick in unless, you're into a pretty heavy system.
Right.
So, and I will do one last note on this, is that on really the one piece is just the well, really, even if you go to the old code 1107.8.2, I was worried about the new language about supporting new code has language about, stop valve supports, making, don't have it on a piece of tubing that might twist. Shall be supported. That is covered in 1107.8.2 to really say when it's in copper tubing, don't mount the valves securely and independently. So that I was worried that might be another substantive change, but again, I'm still coming up with nothing. So to the committee, can we maybe put this to bed?
I think there could be a cost impact with larger systems, but it's hard to determine because it's going to depend on the system design and the number of components, the number of condensers and all that.
Right, because there are exceptions.
But I'd
Let me
say
tell you
for,
what Let me tell you what I've written down so far, just from gleaned from this discussion, and you guys can tell me whether or not you think I've captured what you're talking about. I have a potential minimal impact for systems over 100 pounds of refrigerant, likely no impact for smaller systems.
I think that's well stated.
To the point.
Sounds good.
All right, we're ready to head back into new business.
That's everything I had.
All right. So first item is really going to be looking at what had been in but is in section 401.2, looking at, there's been a modification to where the old code act, we need to bring up our current OMSC just to show the difference. In the trigger for mechanical ventilation had been when a system, when a dwelling unit was tested with a blower door test, then it said the unit shall be ventilated by mechanical means. So this has been sitting there for a long time. We haven't had a requirement for it. There has always been the option to use natural ventilation, and the trigger has been a little questionable. The purpose of the work group will try and figure out when and how the trigger would be to require for potentially, as was said in the proposal, all dwelling units in R2, R3, R4 would require mechanical ventilation. As it stands under current code, there isn't a mandatory trigger via the structural code to, so now we can go to the new language. And we could probably leave it as is in this, where's our markup? And model code is saying in compliance with the IECC or 90.1, since 90. We would normally strike that language and put in requirements with the energy code shall be ventilated by mechanical means in accordance with section 403. And ambulatory facility care group should be in accordance with I2, or I2 occupancies need to be mechanically ventilated in accordance with 407, which really refers to our the ventilation requirements from Oregon Health Authority is really what that's saying. So I2 occupancies under their ventilation, which I think refers to standard and ASHRAE standard 140 or 147. But so as shown, I believe we're looking at, due to the recommendations of not moving forward first, the public proposal 2201 and leaving current language or as marked up currently. And this does clarify in the model code that it's about dwelling units. Which will point out something else we'll have to clarify, might have to clarify later on. But so because of the actions of the building code board and what they're looking and recommendations to the division at this point, the division is, and if you want to, Laura, if they want, we can look at the proposal, but they're saying don't make the building code structures board said don't make significant changes until the work group gets together, and that would make and since the proponent of 2201 was at the meeting yesterday and was accepting of having their proposal withdrawn, this is saying that the division would be recommending waiting on doing anything with 2201 until not adopting today and moving forward with code as marked.
So really, we're just looking at model code changes here, not any proposals. Is that what you're suggesting?
That is the suggestion right now, is to make sure that we're staying with the model code and prior Oregon amendments at this point until such time as the work group has gotten together and come back with something that works well. Part of the reasons are interaction with the energy code and making that language work well. There are some broken pieces when we go to the energy code once you go into mechanical ventilation. There's also, we have separate ventilation rates, differing ventilation rates for what's required for low-rise apartments versus once you go to high-rise, we'd like to make sure we have the same numbers for both on that, that this has been thought out. Oregon has had we had an indoor air quality task force, and the construction claims task force had done a lot to Oregon code that model code still hasn't caught up with, and that has to do with ventilation in bathrooms and a few other pieces. So we've got some Oregon amendments that are better than model code that address some of the IAQ issues already, that need to be considered when we look at ventilation rates. And also there are changes taking place to model code on ventilation rates that we want to make sure all of this is a good holistic review of all of the pieces that we don't feel can be done in the short time frame, and look at all of the impacts, which include not only first cost impacts just for the ventilation portion, but also some energy impacts and the cost impacts relative to those, to really do it in depth. And we didn't feel it would be beneficial to do too much at this point. And the recommendation from the Building Code Structures Board was to continue with what is currently in code.
That makes sense. It's that's a difficult subject. Lot involved. So the only change here that I'm seeing is that it's pointing to the energy code for dwelling units complying with the air leakage requirement of that energy code. Do you know what those are right now, the air leakage requirement, just in a summary, or we don't need to look at it, but.
So this is one area where we may want to look at this sentence in the move to 90.1 2019.
Okay.
There had been an option of just doing it, and when it was, our old code had, and this is one of the revisions, was when we did air leakage testing was the trigger. There hasn't been a requirement for air leakage testing until this point. So this is a
Right.
So I would probably recommend just taking this sentence out altogether for now until we get this resolved, so that there isn't that confusion for the enforcement people of, well, is it or is it in code? Because this really should be worded differently. You're saying you can do natural or mechanical ventilation, then, oh, but wait, dwelling units are or aren't in there, and then the language in the energy code has some breakdowns of what's low rise and high rise and so forth. So regardless, it would say do it per 403.
I think
we should always just point to 403, and I would recommend striking this sentence for now until we get done.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Also, it says dwelling units complying. Don't all dwelling units have to comply?
So so that's
Yeah.
where this makes a bit of a conundrum. For you start with saying every occupied space shall, with one or the other, then you turn around and say, well, this is more the language should be other than dwelling units, or, the language isn't very good for enforcement right now. And given that we want to not create confusion, if you took this sentence out, you'd be doing what's in the current code.
Yeah.
Since it wasn't required to be tested in the past.
Yeah, for that, given that this, what the work that needs to be done crosses multiple codes, it's well beyond this committee.
Yeah.
So might as well deliver something that is workable now. And obviously that this will become a strikeout, so the language is embodied, but not part of it.
So could we get a up or down on striking this sentence and not accepting OMSC 2201? So I want you to see what we might want to bring up 20, since the first code item is about this paragraph and the proposal 2201, and showing what that had said,
Well, I mean, it looks like this proposal basically eliminates natural ventilation.
That's basically what they're doing. The blower door test and everything.
and through some of their discussion on this between the two proposals, they're hoping to not allow any pressurization of corridors whatsoever. That would be an independent system. And there's a lot that needs to be done to really align the language to make sure that we're talking about ventilation for dwelling units versus the corridors and hallways and public spaces. So the way some of the language reads is if you're R2 or R3, even the office and the laundry room get ventilated per this other section. So that's something we'll get to in a minute. But so general question is, sounded like we were kind of in agreement to strike that one sentence. You still have to do per 403, and there are specific sections for dwelling unit ventilation rates. And we can get into that later.
Mhm.
And to not accept 2201 is that correct? Or
Correct. I agree with that.
anyone disagreeing, please speak. All right. And just for one note, we've had an Oregon amendment to show that, private dwellings with a bathtub, shower, or spa do need to comply with the ventilation rates that we've had in past codes. The one note on this is that this makes sure that residences, regardless of the size, the exhaust from needs to be the 80 CFM that the Construction Claims Task Force put up over a decade ago now. 80 seems to work a lot better in bathrooms, especially in apartments, where you have a small, normally they're smaller bathrooms. So this is just a note for the group that's still in there for clarification. All right, let's bring back up. So we'll take that. We'll bring up the matrix for item 4-2, intake and exhaust opening locations. And we'll also talk about proposal OMSC 2202. So let's see here, 401.4 on the left side here, you're going to notice that there is an allowance that intake opening shall be not located not less than 3 feet below contaminant sources where they're within 10 feet of the opening. And this is about, distance from other environmental air like bathroom exhaust or space exhaust. You have to have that 10-foot opening. Separation is not required between intake air openings and living spaces, exhaust air openings of an individual dwelling or sleeping unit where an approved factory built intake exhaust combination termination transition fitting is used to separate the air streams in accordance with manufacturer's installation instructions. Laura, if I'm correct, that's the model code language, right?
Yes, you are correct.
Okay, so bring up 2202.
Seems remarkably similar.
The difference is that they're striking the word approved. And as our building officials here know, approved is a very magic word. That means they have the say on this. And so that means that each time someone wanted to do this, that they would have to ask Jeff, will you please approve this for me? And the intent of the proposal is just to say, if it's a factory built unit and it's installed in accordance with the appliance manufacturer's instructions, they don't have to go ask Jeff, hey, will you please give me approval to do this? That's really what happens with this public proposal. So
This one makes sense to me.
Already been tested and everything by a factory, so I mean, it's a manufacturer's instructions.
and
What
again,
does the-
this is
What does the addition of appliance do to this, though?
and it really we need to change. I would recommend changing something here because we aren't talking about appliances. This is
Uh-uh.
equipment.
And also, are we talking, because we're talking about as a manifold that's built, factory built for intake and exhaust. I don't think that's an equipment or an appliance item. That's an accessory. So whose appliance manufacturer are we talking about? The ventilation
Well, it's-
device?
So
It would probably be the device that goes with the equipment.
Right.
let's scroll down and see.
Okay.
These are
They
like
sort of-
those concentric direct vent accessories that you could get with your water
Yeah.
heaters. Same thing, but just with an exhaust heat recovery ventilator.
Scroll down a little bit more and you'll see their example
talking
on
about-
this. So there you
Yeah.
go.
I get
So it's
you.
really, it allows so there is definitely, if you look on this example, there is not 10 feet between the exhaust and the intake right there.
Nope. Not
know,
even 10
so-
inches.
You know,
This
I
is
have-
much like an economizer, exhaust relief. They're very
Exactly.
close to each other for this. So the intake can, by this language change, the intake can be close to the space, the dwelling units relief. Now, this doesn't relieve them of that dwelling relief, the little gray arrow, from its separation to say an operable window for another apartment, but it is allowing that intake, that mechanical intake, to be close to the exhaust.
Yep.
Discharge on these concentrics.
And what I'm getting at is it saying that by putting the word appliance in there, you can't mix and match, say, a new tone ERV with a Brown exhaust manifold?
Maybe. I think that's probably what you're getting at. Yeah.
Mhm.
That way you have to stay with the same manufacturer.
Same manufacturer.
So should the word listed be in there anywhere?
That would imply that there is a listing standard for this, which there isn't a
Probably.
particular, that
Yeah.
we couldn't point to UL blah blah to say there. But I
And
think maybe the word appliance is, since it is not hooking to an appliance.
No. Equipment might be better.
Yeah, you either need to make it equipment or strike from just staff.
Plus, I'm seeing an application where you wouldn't have an ERV, you could just have balanced ventilation. It's
And why do they have appliance anyways? It's just accordance with the manufacturer's instructions.
Mhm. Which is what the proposed language is. Yeah.
so really this proposal here would I think we're getting at, it would just be the strikeout of approved.
You're striking, yeah, and not accept the word appliance. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah.
So we'll take this and we'll do a little quick thumbs up on this. Accepting
Yeah.
the model change with also public proposal 2201, striking the word appliance.
Striking the word approved.
Oh,
Well,
Well,
that's
well,
already
actually-
in there.
yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
So we're doing additional striking the appliance.
I got it.
And just devil's advocate for a second, does that mean that we're trusting that the manufacturer has done their due diligence? Or I guess that's not a question. That is what we're doing. Is there a possibility the manufacturer could come out with some hokey model of this that works really poorly?
Uh,
Well, pretty sure of that.
Possibly, but we are just to be clear, we are talking about environmental exhaust, right? This is mainly
Right.
for bathrooms and stale air.
Yes.
And
And
the intake here is not an operable window, right? They're talking about a forced air intake.
right, we're discussing
So
for an
it's
individual dwelling unit.
pretty safe.
So it's their own exhaust and their own intake
Right.
is how this applies. So
Well, if they want to remanufacture their exhaust, I'm okay with it.
And the other question that neither code nor this proposal brings up is, what are the minimum distance requirements between these devices? Or is there such a thing?
So that would then reapply. So
Mhm.
this is solely for of an individual. So when you're applying it solely to an individual dwelling unit, apartment A can use this and not have to worry about separation. But when you're to apartment B, apartment A's exhaust needs to be
10 feet.
10 feet from.
Okay. Fair enough.
So
So the other codes still apply.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah, I mean, as a designer, these things are fantastic. Makes the architects happy too.
Well,
Or
from past
happier.
experience having to make these, try and design something that the architect wanted pretty for the building.
Less penetrations.
This is, yeah, very helpful, and it is very low risk.
Yeah.
All right, so we have, that is approve model code language and 2201, but striking the word appliance from the proposal 2201. So we're ready to move on to item from our matrix of 4-3. And this was proposal 2203. This is about outdoor air flow rates, and I believe on this one they were changing 404.3. I think we got a number off here.
Yeah, it starts with 403.1.
So this is the one, and if can you, current code, again, from our previous action, we're looking to maintain current code about R2s. Currently R2, R3, and R4s can provide exhaust only systems. Currently, that still allows you to do the quote corridor. Some of the air can come from the corridor, some can come from natural ventilation. From division standpoint, this could remain as is. Do we want to bring up just real quick the proposal just to show what was included in that? So they were going to, part of this was to require balanced ventilation. They were striking the except mechanical air requirements, exhaust supply, or combination thereof. So currently our occupancies are allowed to have the quote balance of in and out is not currently required for dwelling units. But they were striking the one good point from this is striking the 3 stories or less in height above grade plane, which does at least allow the same ventilation rate for all buildings under the model code. This is it was allowing for any dwelling units to go into this. Let's scroll down a little further through this. He was making it applicable under 403.3.1 to be, again, 3 stories, applying to all.
Yeah, they're taking it all out.
To all of them, which is good, but it should really be, it should be qualified. This is about the dwelling units, because the earlier languages was about, this is how you're doing the design for the dwelling units. This would then apply to, as written, it's applying to dormitories and dorm rooms and different R occupancies and the corridors in dorm rooms and apartments and their laundry rooms and their offices and their break rooms and their exercise rooms would all have to be done per this thing. And we will need to clarify about dwelling units on this until you get to 403.3.2.1. And he was asking, the proponent was asking for a balanced system, requiring it within the unit to be balanced. Until we go through all of the pieces of this, that was this is something we want to get to, the question we want to get to the work group. He was also moving to the ventilation rates under model code, and you'll see in equation 4-9, he was changing it from 0.01 CFM per square foot of floor area to 0.03 CFM a square foot of floor area. By requiring balanced ventilation, you could use less flow. This is a change from the current model code, looking to something that might be coming in the next model code. It's probably too early to do this until we look at all of the pieces of the puzzle on this.
Yeah.
Again, I would like to say to the group, until the work group gets together, the proponent accepted, let's put this off until a really holistic solution that addresses all of these and the different floors. And
Makes sense to me.
so
good with that.
under this, we're not going to accept OMSC 2203, correct? We're going to recommend work group as well.
Right.
Agreed.
Yeah, let's do that.
Particularly that differentiation between occupancy and dwelling units specifically.
But under this, would you like to sort of make this app as a applicable, the ventilation language that we have, let's go back to the very beginning and start looking at the 3 stories and under portion versus all. So with 403.3, do we want to make this dwelling units in groups R2, 3, and 4, striking 3 stories and less? Do you want to address it at this time or also let that wait? I got that. There's the initial question to the group. We can leave the code as is and let the work group sort it out. Or you can look at where this happens and make some clarifications now, during this adoption process, or just wait.
Well, is what they're going to figure out going to change what we're going to strike out?
So as it stands under the current, you would go to, let's go to table 403.3, and we'll scroll down to, so as it currently stands, if you're 3 stories and under, and maybe just for the dwelling unit. Where is the table showing? On
There it
here?
is.
No, the
Oh.
403.3 table. It may be for even further down. The table of all the space types.
Okay.
Let's scroll down to that, and it may even be further than that. Or did it make it in here? Yes. So if we'll stop on this page, scroll down a little bit more. So private dwelling, single and multiple, what we had to rely on in the past was that if you were under current code, if you're 3 stories and under, you go to the formula and you do number of occupants and the area, and you come up with a ventilation method that way. Or if you were a high-rise condominium, you would come to this one and you're basing it on the living area, where it says a air change rate. Okay, air changes per hour, but not less than 15 CFM per person, based on 2 people for the first bedroom and 1 person for the additional bedroom, which sort of aligns with the other method, but depending on the height of your ceilings, it can definitely
Are they
change the
just trying-
ventilation rates.
So they're just trying to standardize it, just make it all one thing.
That is, yes, that if you were
In a nutshell.
looking at this, if all dwelling units, this table might apply in some oddball situations that where it doesn't quite fit in R2, R3, R4, but that's still a dwelling unit outside of an R2, R3, R4.
Right.
But for the most part, probably the work group will come up with something that is if you're a dwelling unit, this is how the hope is that this is how you do all of them. This is the bathroom rate. This is the kitchen exhaust rate, whether it's continuous or.
So they're just simplifying it.
It's more a simplification, yes, to make sure that, hey, I see a dwelling unit. That's the ventilation rate for the dwelling unit. And that was the intent of the part of the proposal, but also to do a bit more. What we would want to potentially look at is clarifying that this had to do, when we get back to wherever it says R2, R3, R4, we are dealing with dwelling units versus, because R2, R3, and 4 have more than just dwelling units. And the intent is, when you're a home, this is the ventilation rate we're looking at. Did I completely confuse people on that one?
Oh, that makes sense.
But this table deals with exhaust flow, right?
So outdoor
Alright.
air quantity is the people airflow rate, and normally for most, when you're in commercial, you have a certain amount of ventilation per 1,000 square feet in the second column. Then you have an additional amount per person in the third column. And no, first one is occupant density. The second one is the amount per person. And the third column, if it's applicable, that's the amount per square foot. Exhaust airflow rate can be, and the footnotes will point this out, that sometimes there's a mandatory exhaust rate.
Right.
That's applicable.
But isn't this what the committee is going to?
All of
the
these
the
pieces,
work group
yes.
is going to look at it because and clarify where the makeup air is coming from for balanced ventilation and not just exhaust.
Correct. Whether it's balanced ventilation, how balanced ventilation is done,
Yeah.
how makeup air gets in, how much outdoor air, what's the appropriate outdoor air amount, what's the appropriate exhaust amounts, what's the appropriate formula to be used, and where you might get credits if they also do balanced and distributed ventilation, because you
Yeah.
do get extra credit for that.
Yep.
Under model code in 62.2. You get credits. And so then we can look at, that's the intent of the work group. So do you want to delve into that at this time, or just let the work group straighten out where it comes to number of floors?
I'm heading towards the work group. 'cause there's other nuances too.
Yeah. Yeah, that's what I was getting at, Kevin. There's other nuances that
Okay.
involve stuff here.
I mean,
So towards
between
the work group, let them work it out.
between these
Okay.
these two types of R occupancies, there's language about where the air comes from and how it's dealt with. You know, it's I'm looking at like 403.1, supply and return or exhaust, and then 4.3.2.1. It's exhaust, supply, or combination thereof, which, you know, I guess it's a lot of differences, not just the calculation of the airflow.
Mhm.
And just one note on always when it comes to outdoor air under 403 point. Trying to find my number here. I think it's 403.1. Let me pull that back up.
Actually, I think it's 311. Outdoor airflow rate.
There's the exception that always allows the design professional to adjust and use their knowledge of what's actually happening on the site.
Mhm.
You put your stamp on it, you're taking responsibility for it, but
Right.
you have the ability to adjust as needed. So with that, we'll go back to the matrix and say that really not accepting proposal 2203, recommend that the work group address other issues relating to. So no other changes in 403. So now we're to item 4-5, which is recirculation of mechanical exhaust prohibited. In note G, where are we? Can we blow that up just a little bit? Do our zoom up, go back down to the footnote, and it takes place in, let's find a few of the spots where it's showing. Pretty much it has to do with bathroom exhaust. Let's scroll down a little bit. We'll find another spot
Missing
for
some plumbing fixtures.
yeah, pretty much where there's plumbing. There we went. Here we are. Toilets and bathrooms from private dwelling units is also toilet and bathrooms from hotels and motels. So now let's
Public.
go down to and toilet rooms from public.
Makes sense.
So this has been in there. We're not changing what it applies to, but there was a note that this is clarifying that what has been some really hard to understand model code language about recirculation. There's been this note in different shapes and forms about recirculation. People were always worried about wheel type energy recovery ventilators because some does actually recirculate, and they're just re-clarifying in a different way that when you have a wheel type ERV, that some will leak in up to 10%, recognizing that yes, some of your bathroom exhaust might actually recirculate back into the building and it's not going to kill you. And it is allowed. Because if you take just the literal of mechanical exhaust is required and recirculation is prohibited, a wheel type couldn't be used. A wheel type energy recovery ventilator couldn't be reused because some air is going to go, as it's turning around, there is a little bit of bleed over from the supply to the exhaust, or from the exhaust stream to the supply stream. That's
Definitely
the whole point
will.
of this note.
It definitely will be now that the new termination is coming in.
Okay. But yeah, this is for not the blade type. But yes. So that is the point of this section here.
but it does put a cap on it.
Yes, it has a cap of,
10%.
right. Is that acceptable to the group?
Is that going to affect the new termination fittings as well?
These won't be, those termination fittings are for plate type that are really teeny.
Okay.
You won't, these are, I don't know of any homes that are, or dwelling units that are running
Nice.
non-plate or the wheel type. That's for really
Right.
bigger
Like
centralized systems. Yeah,
Okay.
bigger ones. We're talking
The only-
thousands of CFM.
Right.
Confusion that I could see here is the interpretation of occupancy of science laboratory.
Right.
I mean, is first of all, science laboratory and occupancy. And second, there's all sorts of different levels of laboratories.
Well, that's for
You know,
sure.
high school science rooms, you should be able to use your ERV for that. You're doing biohazard medical research labs, you probably shouldn't be doing that.
Yeah, good point.
Sounds like they're just trying to eliminate all of them, science laboratories.
I would say it would make more sense if it was for occupancies other than H.
Right.
And it would be a lot, I think that's would be make more sense and give the engineer of responsible charge some leeway for science rooms in a high school.
Could I maybe propose that they're really trying to clarify that for exhaust of environmental air,
Right.
Yes.
it won't be environmental air. If it's not environmental air, if we can go back and make sure we're not going to count people out on this, but really crossover environmental air is allowed.
Right.
It's
That is
not
the point.
environmental air going through it. We shouldn't be discussing this.
There we go.
Right.
That, perfect, Mark.
So we could say for environmental air exhaust, where there's a wheel type, so we could strike occupancies other than science laboratories and put for environmental air exhaust.
I agree.
That's good.
Yep.
Yeah, I like that a lot better.
And yeah.
While Mark's formatting there, any fiscal and economic impact on this one that you guys can think of?
No, it's really a product standard statement.
Already there, really.
And to be honest, most of this language was spread in odd spots through the code. They're really bringing in some language from elsewhere to just make sure this is noted properly. Everyone good with what's on the screen?
I like it.
All in favor or anyone opposed? Speak now. And before we move on, just a little note of what's happening in the table. Some current organ amendments are staying. We'll probably make a final note on that, but that has to do with our current requirement for private bathrooms has been 80 CFM. We'll scroll down. When it's intermittent exhaust, we've had one thing that has changed in the model code. Oregon has always required that if it's mechanical intermittent exhaust for kitchens, it was 150 CFM. Model code was 100. We had when it's continuous exhaust out of the kitchen, had been 25 in Oregon code. and model code, they have upped the number, as the magic arrow is floating around right there pointing at. They've upped it in the 2021 to 50 CFM. Would the committee like to, number one, we would be at a minimum maintaining the Oregon amendment. Do you wish to increase the continuous ventilation amount from 25 to 50 for kitchens?
In other words, maintain what we've had.
Or raise
Number
it.
one is maintain what we've had for intermittent exhaust, but if they have a continuous exhaust system in the
Okay.
kitchen, that quantity was increased. Would you like to increase the continuous exhaust rates? So
I see.
This is for all
under the
residential.
current, it's the under current code, this is for the 3 stories and above.
Yeah.
Well, actually, it would be, no, the way our notes work, this would be all for all dwelling units. Yes. All private dwelling units would have these numbers.
I mean, 50 makes sense. Unless you have so many dwellings that extra 25 starts to add up, and right.
Would you like to just wait for the committee on that one, or
Yeah.
the advisory committee on that?
We're talking about 25 CFM, and I'm struggling to say yes on this one.
Okay.
So
All right. Current Oregon amendment then on private dwelling units.
Yeah. I'm okay with
It's like that
that.
as a general, just since we're
Yeah.
putting all the other things about dwelling units to this group, let's have them re-examine where the appropriate spot is.
And is that number referring to, the parsing is a little strange now with the different editions. Is that referring to kitchens?
Okay, the first one is kitchen exhaust.
Yep.
0.75. All right, wait.
Yeah. And then down below, we have toilets and bathrooms. The Oregon
Okay.
code is, and Oregon has always modified the 50 in model code to be 80. Keep those bathrooms dry.
Right.
Model code is moving to 25 for their continuous ventilation quantity. Just assume that the change is just going to stay. We can either accept, division's going to want to see the 80 not change, just because it's worked so well for so long for us.
No,
But
it's pretty standard.
but the 25, the increase of 20, as is being shown, will maintain current Oregon code, I guess, would be what I would say to them, and that any changes to these quantities should be examined by the ventilation committee.
Yep.
Review committee. How about that?
sounds good.
That's fair.
All right. That
I'm
sounds
good with that.
very fair. All right. Let's move on. So we're done with 4033 demand control ventilation. Let's go to section 403.3.1.3. I mean, yeah, we have to go back. The table's too big. It's got stuck at the end. And at some point, we'll see, if people need to take a quick break, we can take a 5-minute break once we're done with chapter 4, and then come back. And I think we can wrap up gas pretty quickly, hopefully. So here is clarifying demand control ventilation. So when you have a CO2 sensor, what this is clarifying is that in the tables, there's a minimum ventilation per square foot that's required in some spaces, and there's also a ventilation per person. they're saying that the air, once a building is occupied, you always need to maintain that airflow to the floor area. But you can, based on the occupancy sensors, turn off the portion of the ventilation that is for people. So if we go down to, and let's go down to back down to that fun table. Sorry to ask you to scroll down there again. Okay, we can stop right here. So second column says occupant density, the number of people. The third column says people airflow rate. Based on that number of people is 5 CFM per person or 7.5 CFM per person. They're saying, clarifying that when an occupancy sensor or excuse me, or CO2 sensor says there's nobody in the space, you can stop
The outdoor
portion
air.
of the air.
Yeah.
However, the next column, the fourth column, the outdoor air flow rate per square foot of floor space cannot be reduced. That always has to flow in. So when once the building, so if you turn on the building at 8 a.m., that first quantity always has to flow in. You can use CO2 sensors or occupancy sensors to reduce the amount of the airflow rate per person.
I mean, that's been the intent of the code since these were added in. So
I don't see a problem with eliminating that as long as people aren't breathing too hard.
So, yeah. So once you start getting people in the space, your VAV box or whatever would bring this quantity back up. Or if your CO2 sensor starts to see a rise, then you can go back from this sort of column 4 is sort of a minimum outdoor air that you're always shooting for. You then can start going up based on column 3.
and really,
That's
this
in
is
the model code.
really this is a clarification because that's been a requirement from the beginning.
And I am now going to throw something in to confuse everything for everyone. 62.1 is now moving to where they allow it to go to 0. Just let everyone know. Now, this is setting a minimum. So for design engineers out there, we can go back to the 403 point. You still have the ability as an engineer to still design this to do less than the code minimum. So it's not an outright prohibition in your control sequence. However, you can go lower than the code minimum that's shown here now on the script. You would be allowed to do that adjustment.
I know the purpose of column 4 was to deal with indoor air pollutants that are not human related, so building materials and such.
Right.
So
the design engineer could pick less, but however, the minimum, when they're willing to sign on it, but however, the minimum is here, yes, by our mechanical code, here's the minimum. And you always need to keep some air turning over in the spaces when the building is occupied. As soon as you turn on the air handler, make the minimum airflow. So that's a clarification with one confusing note, of course. But so to scroll back up to the piece, we're going to stick with model code then from the feedback I'm getting from the group. Because there is always a chance, there is flexibility for the designers, but this is the general intent of the code, is to make sure that minimum airflow based on square footage is always maintained.
Okay.
Thumbs up?
Yeah.
Thumbs up here.
All right, and there's no cost with that because really this is clarifying what current code is. Let's go to the model code. So for dwelling units, they do have the ventilation right here. They will give credit under this exception to if you're doing a balanced and essentially a distributed system. So if you do have exhaust and supply and you do have a system that will put air into at least the living room, the dining room, or the kitchen, and all bedrooms, you can take a further reduction from the formula up here. That was brought in at model code, and it really aligns with what is in 62.2. The question is, do you want to accept what's in the model code here or wait for feedback from the ventilation committee? So this is new model code language right here. That came in the 2021 OMSC.
I mean, it's basically saying you have a more effective ventilation system because it's ducted. Isn't this predicated on ASHRAE 62 as well?
The reductions are based on what would be, what 62.2 would call a distributed and balanced system. They give credit for that.
Right.
Is it 100% in alignment? No, but it's close. How about the language? The trigger for the exception, they do give a 30% allowance when you do a balanced and distributed system. But I believe they also have a different number now in the latest 62.2 for dwelling units.
I'm following all the way down to 2.2. The whole house ventilation system is a balanced ventilation system. What does that exactly mean? Is that you are pushing air into the furnace and pulling it out of the furnace with an HRV? Or
any system that pushes in the same amount as you pull out.
so it's controlled mechanical.
Control
Exhaust.
mechanical, exhaust and control mechanical supply.
Makeup.
Yeah.
Okay.
Or outdoor ventilation.
So, Mark, this is not taking into account any requirement for forced air furnace or anything like that. So if you have a ductless mini split system supplying all the heating or cooling for the whole area, that won't matter.
Well, it has to meet both of those, and the first one says that it must be ducted.
So as a general explanation, you could have, say, a mini split system or just all electric heat, baseboard heaters, whatever. You would then have something like a ERV, or they have systems that don't have ventilation units that don't have it. But if you put in we'll just use the ERV example. You would have to have a ducted one that would put a drop into each bedroom and a drop into either the living room, dining room, or kitchen, and have exhaust that was equivalent to the supply. So yes, you could do it with non-furnace type systems because you could still put ventilation have a ventilation system that could put air into each of these, and they would be running all the time or potentially, providing ventilation air and environmental air exhaust. That clear?
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have any problem with this language.
Me neither.
keeping this in right now.
The ventilation group may do something, but
Sure.
group for just keeping the model language for now, address potential for addressing later.
It also gives the ventilation group more to chew on.
Okay.
Because again, this is only for 3 stories and less, our occupancy. So,
Any objections on maintaining model code here?
Nope.
All right. Actually has. So here we go to the next one, item on 407.1. Care facilities here. The first one is actually, a little out of order, but we are talking about item section 407. And we just make it clear that when we talk about I2 facilities, we're subject to licensure of unlicensed facilities. We note which section it is of their regulations, and that you're essentially using ASHRAE standard 170. And they've also added in NFPA 99 because there are some potential additional things in NFPA 99 that could potentially relate and be referenced by the OHA reg. So when it's licensed by OHA, they do set and essentially claim authority over ventilation of medical facilities when they're licensed. And this is just clarifying that we're not publishing all of those special ventilation rates for operating rooms and surgery centers, patient rooms, etc. This has been past language. They're adding in this year in model code and NFPA 99.
it's a good call. Since you're gonna go to 99 anyway if you're designing for I2.
So any objections to maintaining Oregon?
No objections.
None.
All right. We'll go to 404.1 and close parking garages. This is a past Oregon amendment. When we talk about mechanical and ventilations, we're letting you use the reduced ventilation triggers that come via the energy code, and allowing you to do the NOx, CO2, or carbon monoxide sensors to make sure that we're pointing to the energy code as well, and allowing you to do it per the energy code. You can do it on your own if you don't get triggered by the energy code, but you can continue to do intermittent ventilation. The mechanical code sets the ventilation rates. Some of the triggers under the energy code of having to use this are found in the energy code. And we've done some cleanup to make sure that the triggers are easy to do. And want to note that this has been a past Oregon amendment, and just seeing if everyone's okay with continuing to do that.
Like it.
Yep. Okay. Here.
I'm good.
All right. People feel like they need a 5-minute break, or do we want to move on to gas? And so far, before we leave chapter 4, I'll not have Andy yelling at me. It looked like we didn't have anything in chapter 4 that had a cost impact, correct?
No.
Or did anybody see one of these
I didn't.
when we were going through them?
No.
One thing that I captured during the discussion, and so correct me if I'm wrong here, it sounded like on the removing of approval from that 401.4, I think it was, might actually create some efficiencies for building departments because they're not being asked to come out and approve something that they shouldn't have to approve. Does that sound
Oh.
right?
That's true. Good catch.
Ooh.
Good point.
Okay, that was the only thing that I had down on there. So yeah.
All right, we will go on to the, so people want to just roll through this now?
Sure.
Move on to fuel gas?
I'm okay.
All right, let's move to section C 307.2. Item C1.
Do you want to go over the appendices, A, B, and C?
Okay, yeah, all right, that we did not do those. And let's just show to them.
Oh,
These are the appendices that are informative, that show pretty much how to, A is about getting that clearances and chimney connectors, and has been in the code for some time. No substantive changes this year. Appendix B is, again, it's informative and not part of the code. It's sort of a sample for building departments. Boards of Appeals completely
Oh,
struck, because this is
Was it preempted by?
yeah, it's preempted. We don't put it in the code. This is something that the local department does once they create. We don't set their rules on how they do their Board of Appeals. How about that?
Okay, thank you.
Jeff and Jeff? Don't want us messing with your authority, right? Okay. So
Everyone on our appeals board is dead, so it'll be fine.
no appeals.
all right. So with that, now we will wonderful news from some of our jurisdictions. We'll go on item C1, moving on to fuel gas code and concealed condensate piping.
Cute. Is that right?
I think it was on 307.2.
Hmm.
We talk about it, then yeah, this is new code language about terminations. And so sometimes you have a secondary drain, just making it clear that when a fuel burning appliances has a primary and a secondary drain, if they are doing one, that termination identifies which one is the secondary drain. So that if you see water dripping out of the one that says you're having an overflow condition, you know that's
You have a problem.
overflowing. Yeah.
Does it note how it's to be identified? Magic marker?
It does not. Does
Scratch.
not include that.
Painted red.
And
See.
It'll just become discolored on its own.
the primary, right?
Yeah.
Nobody's gonna pay attention to it anyways.
based on the
Most-
number of roof scuppers I see
Most-
overflowing, and nobody goes like,
Yeah, right.
"What?"
It's working. It's working.
Yeah. I've seen people modify roof scuppers to make them work better. It's like, oh, no.
That's funny.
So any comments on this modification to model code about if you make the drains disappear into a wall or other concealed space, you need to know what it is when it comes back out. Which one is which when it comes back out, really.
Well, I just kind of wish it gave me a direction of how I'm supposed to identify them, because that I'll get a lot of argument if I say it needs a brass tag on it.
Because it doesn't say that, right?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Are we supposed to paint it red? Do we need a tag?
Probably like a sticker tag, but even then, you know, do you have enough room? Sometimes it's just a little stub out the wall.
Should we put in the magic approved word on this?
Ah,
Well, it just gives it all up to interpretation on how you're going to mark it.
So I guess the other question to everyone is how often this is happening to where
I've got a whole apartment complex that has this going on right now. And so there's 210 units that I'd have this with. So, but luckily it's done. It won't fall under this new code. So. I don't know. You may be getting calls, Mark, after I start asking for stuff.
Well, I thought it had to be in a conspicuous spot already for the overflow. So I'm curious on to why we're labeling it. But you see in the condition that Mr. Kennedy's talking about, that could be a problem of it's not obvious. People just see penetrations in the outside of a building. They don't know what they're for.
I'm fine either way. I'm just bringing up the point that you know, there's going to be some conflict on who wants to do what.
yeah. Well, and I think marked for me invokes a Sharpie, right? So,
I mean, I guess that's up to jurisdiction, really, how it's supposed to be marked.
I think what you were throwing out, Mark, was that it could be marked in an approved manner or something like that.
Or just clearly marked.
Well, I think a Sharpie would clearly mark it until they repaint.
Yeah. Yeah.
Huh.
I'm fine with everyone with whatever you want to do, Mark.
I mean, this is obviously better than what it was. So, and yeah, I'm okay with how you want to proceed.
I'll bring up one point for consideration for everyone in this and going through, oh gosh, what's the call I'm going to get, is if they only have primary drains, you know, they either have the float switches, you know, there's special cutoffs. Will our building officials and our inspectors be asking them to say, yeah, that's the primary drain or not? Is that, I'm kind of getting that as a potential reading from this.
I think everybody will be going towards float switches if this is a requirement.
So, and again, this, some And that we're going to, again, get back that this is condensate from a furnace or boiler that's condensing. And those have cutoffs in them for the most part. There are very few that, they've got a secondary overflow on them that I'm aware of.
Yeah, I think most Dakins or something like that do.
So if you're talking about a condensing furnace or a condensing boiler, here we're
point.
talking specifically about when it's a boiler or water heater or something, or a furnace that is above 90% efficiency and has a drain out of it. Some of them do have a secondary drain. So we're not, loads of times we have the apartments, the air conditioner and the extra pan that we've got on those guys. This is one that's having to do with, you may not have a cooling coil involved, but you have two separate drains, and knowing that, you might be plugging up on combustion versus air conditioning.
Yeah, and the primary is going through a chemical neutralizer. So if the secondary is leaking, then you're not neutralizing.
So you won't be worrying about this on, cooling coils or
No.
the Daikin, mini splits or something like that. This would be really only if it's a combustion appliance, because we're in chapter, fuel burning appliances, Appendix C. Should we just say?
I think what we got.
Well,
is workable.
it sounds like to me that they want them both marked.
Yeah.
Yes.
Why don't we
So-
just mark the overflow? That way, if it's coming out of there, there's a problem.
How about, okay, that was a good point. The termination of concealed secondary drain piping, condensate drain piping, shall be clearly marked in an approved manner.
Ooh.
I like that.
Quadruple down. Because this is really more about sort of a combustion safety issue of
Right.
to let people know.
Absolutely.
So
Say that again.
Works.
oh great. Now I
Nah,
forgot, Laura.
termination of
Sealed secondary condensate piping, right?
Yes. The second. Yes.
sealed secondary.
Sealed condensate secondary piping drain, I guess.
What is it?
It's going to be a big long noun stack there.
Concealed condensate.
Drain piping, I guess would be best.
Oops. Is that right?
We need to see your screen.
Oh, I paused it. I want you to see my email.
Right.
You really should have played the different card on your solitaire. I mean,
Could you imagine? Oh, I'd be so embarrassed.
I think you had clearly marked in there as well.
Oh yeah, and
they'll be clearly marked in an approved manner.
And then everything after that
Yeah.
was strike out, right?
Yeah, pretty much, because you're already just, yeah,
We don't need to know that it's primary.
right. Because it's only marking the secondary.
We have a binary equation here. It is or isn't. No need to mark both. Yeah.
Yeah, it seems silly.
All right. Wow, once
Cool.
again, great. Oregon amendments that just improve on, this is why we do this, guys. Makes model code better. So now, and I'm assuming that's insignificant cost impact,
Pretty minimal, I would think.
or Jeff,
A
are you only
Sharpie.
got,
Well, I think everybody's got Sharpies.
Jeremy has his hand up. Jeremy Faircloth.
okay, do I need to,
Maybe just call him.
recognize Jeremy?
Oh,
Yes.
so basically, I just, a quick question. So I'm the building official of Jefferson County, and I'm trying to educate myself and become more of this stuff and catch as much as I can. I just wanted to see, so like in any time something comes across our deck or desk and is something that's, marked in an approved manner, it creates so much conflict between jurisdictions because you always get it thrown in back in your face. Well, this jurisdiction's let us do it this way. This one lets us do it this way. So if you would at least be willing to maybe give a couple approved methods that would be, visible so we could fall back on it, it would definitely help. Obviously we had the comment, well, how long till somebody pays it? And that's true because it's going to happen, right? But we're only inspecting to what is currently there, not will be. So I was kind of hoping that maybe something could be added, just so when people fight us because they're going to, 210 units, or we have to mark them all. Come on, right? So it would help out if something like that could be added. That's all I have. I just thought I would ask.
So through our process, sometimes so during the discussions, we could say what would normally be accepted under the approved, this is what we envisioned when we said approved manner would be a metal tag, adhesive marker, minimum height, text. Just get a general idea of what people would feel, would be acceptable, so that when they go back through notes and if we have to do a statewide interp, we know, yeah, here's what everybody envisioned on that for the approved. So
Gotcha.
anything from Jeff, Troy, or Kevin?
Well,
Don't see. Go ahead.
I will, suggest a brass, aluminum, or plastic tag, wired to the termination point. I just know when they repaint, an adhesive label will disappear, or maybe even a certain type of fitting might be approved. Something different
Good
than
idea.
what they would normally do for the primary.
I like the tag idea. And I think it'd be pretty easy to put that in there after the word marked.
We do the
You could-
same thing with gas. So
Yeah.
I'm okay with that. I think that's a good idea.
All right, we could make it clearly marked with a
Tag.
tag.
label
You
with a tag. Yeah.
We can get rid of it in an approved manner.
Well, and it could say with a tag or in an approved manner.
Okay, or an approved manner. Okay.
That would give them some direction.
because someone, yeah, you might have something and they go, yeah, well, we can put on a different color PVC fitting or something on the very end that will just make it clear. And that could
Yep.
go on the owner. So, okay,
And would it
I
be better?
like that.
Would it be better to say, as Jeff was suggesting, a brass, aluminum, or plastic tag versus, you know,
Well, I think the tag idea is just the idea of just putting a tag on it. I'm not sure whether clarifying whether it's brass or something, because they're going to paint them. So it's really not going to matter.
sure.
Oh, we could say embossed or engraved tag.
That's what I'm getting at. Is a tag could be just a piece of tape.
Oh, yeah. There you go.
Some scotch tape and a marker. Hey,
Right. Yeah, it's tagged.
Because I'd hate to see us have to go into a list of different
Yeah, right.
materials and aluminum,
Yeah, right.
brass.
I don't think we should go that far.
yeah,
But I think in other areas, and I think there's been embossed or engraved to make sure that it's just not, yeah, you don't put on a little plastic piece and put on a marker on the plastic piece that then gets spray painted over. And then again, if it's pretty obvious what it's going to be, then you still have the option to approve. If they've got something they can say, yeah, this is going to show up for me and it'll save us $5 a apartment or something. They can always come to you on that.
Thank
That
you for
work for
looking
everybody?
at that. I appreciate it.
yeah. So this could have a cost impact.
Yeah. If you're doing 210 units.
Yeah, a little bit of labor and a little material. And granted, the approved manner might be a Sharpie, depending on the jurisdiction, right? So that's, I think, relatively cost-free. Another couple minutes of the pipe fitter's time.
Just minor. Are we talking $5 or less? No cost to $5.
That seems reasonable.
So we have this in an approved manner now. All right, we got thumbs up. All right,
Whee!
let's go to C-2, corrugated stainless steel tubing. And we'll bring up proposal 2204. And do we have our proponent on the line here?
Morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
This is Jonathan Sargent. I'm with Omega Flex. I'm the proponent on this. Is it okay if I address the committee on kind of what I'm trying to do here?
You bet.
The state of affairs with CSST is we have essentially two different products. The legacy product is a yellow jacketed product, and there's a new black jacketed product, which includes an arc-resistant jacket. As a result, the bonding of the two different products is different. So a yellow CSST product needs an additional bonding conductor. One conductor, 75 foot in length maximum, connected to the grounding electrode system of the building. And this is to mitigate threat from a indirect lightning strike. We had some issues in the past. Since then, we developed a conductive jacketed CSST that doesn't require the bond and is, as long as it's connected to an appliance with a grounding conductor, same way black iron and copper and everything else is bonded. Now, the current state of the Oregon code eliminates the requirement to bond the yellow jacketed CSST with an additional bonding conductor. Not sure where that came from, but that's what I was trying to correct here. And there's several different ways to correct it. Probably the best way would be to just take the 2021 IFGC language, which has differential bonding depending on whether it's conducted jacketed or yellow. Has sections 310.2 and 310.3 that deal with that. For some reason, the Oregon Code last cycle eliminated that in the 2018. So CSST has no additional bonding requirements beyond what's required for every other gas piping system. The reason I was going with the manufacturer's installation instruction isn't because it's the best way to skin the cat, it's because it's the easiest. But if you guys are inclined to adopt the 2021 language as is, instead of eliminating the differential bonding for CSST, I'd be happy to withdraw this. I just wanted it to be you guys to know what's going on and have the opportunity to consider it. If you guys have any questions of me, I'm happy to answer.
All right, we'll start with Mark Heiser with the division and sort of what the last go round and the long-standing tradition has been in Oregon is that all electrical work falls to the electrical code. And so our current C309.2 talks about electrical connections between appliances and the building wiring, including grounding of the appliances, shall conform to the electrical code. That's in the part above. And when it comes to CSST, what we have relied on is actually section, go back to it. If we can scroll down to section C404.2. And where we get to, we already have covered that CSST piping has to be installed in accordance with the terms of their approval, conditions of the listing and the manufacturer's installation, and this appendix. So we already have in there about the installation per MII. Could look at adding it in back at the other as put in by the proposal, but we also have to make sure we're always covering that work has to be done per our electrical code as part of this as well. Some of the, and I would have a question, I've seen in some of the manufacturer's installation instructions where if the bonding length exceeds a certain distance, they put in a separate ground rod for this.
If you do that, you have to tie the ground rods together. So you would have to tie that grounding rod into, so you create an equipotential situation. But yeah, you can't do a separate grounding rod, but it has to be tied in with the bonding electric system of the building.
Okay.
So is there any way to just go to section 310 and for bonding of CSST, refer them to 404.2? I didn't realize that was in there.
Yeah, that's in the.
Because that would accomplish the same thing.
That's not what it's saying at the end.
Let's
Look
bring
at
up
the
the
end.
proposal again. I'm sorry.
Well, look at the, shall be considered to be bonded. Sorry. Shall be considered to be bonded where it is connected to an appliance that is connected to the equipment grounding conductor of the circuit that supplies the appliance. Oh, other than, and it used to say other than CSST.
Right. And then yeah, you carved out CSST because it required additional bonding, and then we had a section for that. And then in 310.3, we go back and say, unless it's black jacketed, in which case you go essentially with 310.1. Yeah, it's
Right.
really complicated.
Yeah,
Far
it
more
does,
complicated than it should be.
it does kind of send you around in different directions.
It does. I think eventually we're going to be in a situation where everybody's gone to the conductive jacketed, and we can just say exactly what you guys say. But right now there's still yellow in the market, and it creates it really creates a dangerous situation when you don't bond the yellow. So we want to make sure that it's done really in every state. Oregon's one of the ones where we didn't have specific requirements that the yellow be bonded.
So
And that's
from
additional
division,
bonding,
yeah. So as you've shown it in the proposal that's up here, other than division saying and electrical code, just to make sure that we don't wind up with a condition where someone may run an indirect, may create a different ground and bonding point than the main building, to make sure that that is, any grounding and any bonding won't mess up the electrical code part. Division's fine with that. Just
Yeah.
having a secondary reference about MII at this point doesn't.
Makes sense, and that's consistent with AGA recommendations and also NFPA 54 and the National Fuel Gas Code. So
yeah, everybody's in consensus on how you do it now. The manufacturer's installation instructions are the same as NFPA 54, the same as IFGC, IRC, UPC. Everybody's in agreement now. It's just actually getting it done in the field, and the more direct you are about how you do it, the more likely you are that's going to be done right.
So with Mark's addition, I would accept this proposal.
That's a perfectly reasonable addition. Yeah, I didn't even think about it, but yeah.
So anyone objecting to accepting and then adding and the electrical code to the proposed 310.1.1?
Works for me.
Yep.
No objection.
Okay.
Thank you kindly, gentlemen. I'll be quiet and let you get on to less interesting things than CSST.
And I would say, since it was already in the code, if we were referencing the installation instructions already under 404.2, anyone seeing that this would add cost or make a change to anything?
Could be cost neutral.
All right.
Yeah, it seems like a clarification more than anything.
All right. Item C3, C.
Bonding it is.
C402.7. Here's our wonderful new about these two sections are about now they're doing press connect fittings for gas, and this by having these new standards, it appears that it will allow recognition of up to 5 PSI or better systems with this. And pretty impressive little things that
There are pro presses are pretty nice.
People seeing a lot of them going in gas these days. Guys,
Way more than there used to be. Yes.
Just people are just tired of having those pipe cutters, all the oil on site.
Yeah, they're just messy.
All right. Is everyone okay with the that new change that came in. Gas company's fine, not going to object to having press connect type systems.
If it's downstream of the meter.
Oh, you guys can still say no. You still have the authority.
I guess that's true. I haven't heard any noise on this, but I will check.
So are you going to want hard pipe coming out of the wall to connect to then? Instead of the ProPress all the way to the meter?
I think what
I was just, yeah, we do our own stuff upstream of the meter. That's all I'm trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. I just mean out of the house. You know,
Yeah.
I didn't know if you guys were going to require anything like that.
I'll check on that.
I know when they're running CSST in the wall before they pump out to the meter, most of the Northwest Natural guys want a piece of hard pipe attached to a stud.
Right.
Instead of just coming out with flex, even though I've seen in the manual, you can actually do that. But I don't think they really like it because then they're worried about it twisting while they're making their connections and stuff.
You bet.
All right, so good to go on that one. I think we've got all thumbs up there. Threaded joint sealing. It appears they've made it a little more clear about non-hardening pipe, dope, pipe, whatever.
If we go to all ProPress, we don't have to worry about that either.
I don't know those. So where people might still do threaded joints, this is your piece here. So are we good to go with them just noting that it should be, a non-hardening pipe dope, which is pretty much all of the. I'm not sure if they're selling any ones that are listed for
I don't think
gas
so.
that are hardening anymore anyway. If you look at the little glue cans.
Yep, they're all pretty greasy.
Okay, no cost there.
No.
All right, protection against physical damage. This is our Oregon amendment on that one. Because of our ProPress and acknowledging that it's going to be out there, pretty much the language had said that, you have where you penetrate a stud, you have to have the protector, little block plates, just in case somebody runs a nail through there. Since you can do those pipes with lighter than Schedule 40, we've made it clear that if you're using Schedule 40 or thicker, you don't need the nail protector. But if you happen to have a Schedule 10 sitting in that inside of that stud, a nail gun probably could make it into that one, unlike your Schedule 40 pipe. So this is some we put in the last go round. Just wanted to run it past everybody again. That
sounds good.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Whereas it used to just not specify the gauge, right?
Yeah, model code went to that, but this language is from back in the days when before the ProPress and the press fit connector systems.
There you go.
Band-Aid, Kleenex, that nobody was envisioning having light gauge, or steel, but you can do it with lighter gauge. So shut-off valves and tubing systems. This is an exception we had, and I think it was the mechanical officials and some of the installers last time around. It was about some of the decorative gas fireplaces, where their shutoff valves are and where they are and how they're supported relative to the, these shutoffs are sometimes inside the unit, and there's no room to come in and put in a separate rigidly supported, it comes with the unit. Some of the flex is part of the unit as well. It's probably not applicable in many conditions, but it was a recommendation of the code committee and the board last time around. So
Seems reasonable, especially since it's per the manufacturer.
any discussion from others, or
Does the exception, is that referring to a shutoff valve that is already installed within the manufacturer's unit?
They usually come with one. So they have one connected to the gas connector when they come out. My problem is once you, if they're getting rid of those drop down doors and they have just a key to the valve, but that doesn't shut off the gas to the main gas line. You'd have to do that at the meter. So it's really not, I don't know. We've had talks, pretty extensive talks about this in Washington County about this. So, you know, there's a difference between readily accessible and accessible, and there's two different code sections that apply to that. But so, you know, I mean, if you're going to put it behind and you have to actually pull the unit out to get to the shutoff, I mean, how accessible is that?
Well, accessible just means you have to remove a panel.
That's correct. I agree. I agree. The other code that I'm talking about is the other one that's down from that. It says readily accessible. And that's if you're putting things into a existing fireplace.
This particular section here is referring to
It's the shutoffs, yeah.
securing the shutoff so that when you crank on that shutoff, you're not twisting the tubing or something. Correct, Mark?
Yes.
Yeah. And so what I'm getting at is it says that the exception says gas fireplaces installed per the manufacturer's
instructions.
Well, to me, it should be clear saying exception, gas fireplaces with a manufacturer and installed and secured shutoff valve.
Because we're actually not making them do this right now, but I've been talking to my boss about it.
And this is only with tubing systems, not piping. Is that correct?
That is, yes. So CSST is included in this. So, I mean, they would have to independently support the shutoff if they ran CSST into there and then went to a gas shutoff and then connected the connecting to the gas valve itself. And currently, we're not requiring this.
So this one is solely about, yes, when there is that, just making sure that, say, even in CSST, where you sometimes crank on a valve and keep turning and turning on it, and it goes, where operating the valve could potentially twist or damage the tubing. Right. Making sure that this is just about the support of the valve, the location and language about where valve should be and that's totally independent of the current discussion. So
I agree.
So, but if committee feels that, you know, it would be part of the somebody should, even the MII for the gas, they should have something rigidly supported, and that's how the committee feels. I mean, you could even strike this if you want, but it's up.
Well, if it's common that these gas fireplaces already come with a pre-installed secured valve, then I think that exception is fine.
Not all of them do.
Yeah.
Some of them come on a gas connector and they're just flopping on the connector itself.
Then that should mean, then I think that exception needs to be clarified a little. Gas fireplaces with a manufacturer's installed secured valve.
Does not. Yeah, exactly.
Because if it comes
Because-
with it and you don't need to add another valve,
Right.
then that's great. You don't have to add that other valve. You use the one from the manufacturer. But if you have to add your own valve, you should make
Then
sure
it
it's
should be
secured.
supported. Yes.
Okay, so I think we're getting to, really, there just shouldn't be an exception.
Maybe, yeah, maybe.
Well, to
We
add to
could-
that,
could
since
just make it-
They make fireplaces that have the valve secured to the side of the fireplace. So you just connect, and then they have a connector on the outside of it, and then you run your gas line to it. So, I mean, but there are not very many of them. I've only seen one.
wouldn't you need a shut off in that case anyway, since you're going to put the pipe in first and then install the fireplace? So you have to have something to.
Well, you
Shut-
need the gas line shut off. It can't be just the appliance shut off, because if you shut that off and unhook the gas, what's going to stop the gas from flowing?
Exactly.
Yeah,
So you'd still have an independent
Still,
valve, even if there's
it-
one on the fireplace.
that's correct. And that's what we make them do as well.
So,
Seems
I-
like this might need to be struck.
Yeah, with that last explanation, I would say strike this one.
all in favor or any opposed? Not seeing any opposition. We will put that down as a note as strike that old exception. It does appear to be adding some confusion, so. Okay, chimney lining. So if we can roll down to C 503.5.6.1.
And I have
We have,
another along the way as another item to talk about, but we can get to that after this, after we get through the matrix.
so. Can we, well, you need to see what the old exception was. So there used to be an exception where an existing chimney complies with a whole bunch of other sections and is sized in accordance with section C 503.5.5. Its continued use shall be allowed where the appliance fitted by such chimney is replaced by an appliance of similar type, input rating, and efficiency. And this is getting rid of that exception. I'm trying to remember all the other 503.5.6. Thank you. Yeah. So bringing up the significant change in the description of what is allowed and why they struck this.
So is this talking about where they have the fire clay lining?
So here's our existing water heater going into an existing chimney. And that lining is required for replacement. Oh, of course, this is the one.
So they're saying you can no longer hook up to the existing, you have to run a new liner.
I believe if it's unlined.
Yep.
That makes sense.
I believe it's taking away the, if we go back to the model code language, what is where it says 5.6 through 5.6.3. And ours is.
That's basically what they're saying. You have to bring it up to code.
I'll give you a little extra for consideration on this. If we go back, looks like
And that explanation in the significant changes log was interesting. They're arguing that a similar appliance is not so similar. You have to go to the next page though to get to that. There you go.
Yeah, that's what they're doing. The exception allowed a non-code compliant chimney to serve a new water heater.
well, so if we go to our language,
Yeah, I see.
and I'm not seeing that we have that exception anyway. Oh, wait a minute, that's our 22. I need to find our 2021. Look. This would have a potential cost impact.
I think so too.
But even back in the 30s, they were lining chimneys with fire clay lining. So it'd have to be a pretty darn old building to not have that.
True.
So as it's currently written, to use the exception, now this is just removing any doubt about whether or not the chimney has to be lined. This would
Just says they shall be lined, so.
So, and I think that's a lot of the departments have been saying, you're replacing your water heater, you know, in an old chimney and it's in the basement of a 30s home. Usually, if somebody does go up and look down the chimney, they'll say, nah, you got to line this thing. But it does appear that even if the 1930s chimneys was still in good shape, you would have to put in a liner if you replaced a water heater. So if you took out a 30,000 BTU gas water heater from the 70s and put in a new one that was hooked into an old unlined chimney, you would have to line now. That is my read on the effect of this language. I don't know.
What if it's a 90% furnace? You're just gonna run a PVC vent, right?
Right.
Yeah, that venting would still have to be per MII anyway.
Would you need to line it if you're doing that?
No, but then you wouldn't be using the chimney as
Correct.
as your vent at that point.
Oh, yeah, just as a
That's
case.
That's if you run the pipe all the way up the chimney to.
To a termination, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
but if you're just terminating down in the basement,
Into the chimney, which they used to do a lot.
yeah, then you would need a lining.
So you just put in his chimney or run the flexible flue liner down through it and hook it up to the water heater.
Right.
And I just had this question recently about, you know, putting a condensing appliance into a chimney and went through where code has gone is all shall be per the manufacturer's installation instructions. And finding a hard time finding an MII that doesn't say it needs to terminate outdoors.
Yeah. Unless you want to turn your grout to powder. I mean,
You'll have
Does this
So-
code refer to a certain size of equipment? I know we're talking about, you know, water heaters right now, but boilers do not apply here, correct?
boilers are under, well, venting of boilers is in our, once the flue gases leave, it's us in the mechanical code. So
Okay.
it would apply to a boiler or. So yes, if you had a big old, one of the older schools that has a big masonry chimney and you're replacing the boiler like for like,
Yeah, it's
you could still go back into it,
mainly
lined
that
or
has
unlined.
been my experience that and those chimneys need to be, they're in very bad shape, lining or no lining. And it's just because of the size of the system that's connected to them. And I've seen this in some condominium buildings as well. It's just, but that C503.5.6 calls for an inspection first anyway.
So
I think it's pretty clear.
are we looking at maintaining or at the deletion of that exception? Do we follow model code or a potential, any potential costs it would be for the health, safety, and welfare and could be justified?
I think there's a possibility
Or
there
do you-
could be a cost impact, but I don't think it would be detrimental. They could make it safer.
Yeah, well, this is, you know, safety is the primary concern here, of course. And, you know, we're really talking about two things when you're talking about a chimney that can't hold its ventilation. One is ventilation creep, back inside the house or inside the building or whatever it is. But second, and probably most important, is just the integrity of the chimney itself for seismic reasons, which is why all those old schools are that we've been taking the chimneys completely down and then shortening them to a point that you don't have to put in miles of lining. But you put steel flues down in them, but it's a cost impact. But if the integrity of your chimney is structurally compromised, then this is in there for protection of the health, safety, and welfare. So I think it should remain as it is right here that we're looking at it, Mark.
Yeah, I support that. I would suggest too that if you are replacing a large appliance or any appliance, that it's probably going to be a condensing unit. Unless it's a steam boiler, you're probably going to move towards that just for efficiency. And then you have to have a different exhaust path anyway. So, right.
And I have seen that where condensing is just plugged into a large chimney, and there's, they're meant to go to the exterior of the buildings because they have flue caps that are projecting under forced air, the air. Yeah. But if you dump that into a really large chimney, it could just hang around.
Well, it could cause the unit not to work correctly as well, because I think they have pressure switches in them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think the restrictor inside the concentric is there for a reason.
And for the combustion air, it would be a very bad move to plug that into the chimney as well. But if you're smart enough to plug it outside, then you have those pressure differentials that that cause problems with the unit. So if you want to use that chimney, you have to use it as a chase, and you're going to run those both the combustion air and the
exhaust
and the flue
outside.
gas side by side right up through the chase to the top. Make sure it gets outside. Yeah.
Okay, so we'll take that as accepting the model code deletion of the exception, outdated, and potential cost impact may vary depending on system.
Really quickly, I just want to press a little bit. Do you guys have thoughts on how big of a cost impact are we talking about, and how common of a cost impact are we talking about?
Well, most of those can be vented outside anyways. I mean, I could see in certain circumstances you might want to use, if you're putting the appliance back in the same place it was and you only have that option. But most of those are being vented out through the roof or anyways.
Yeah, the cost impact I see is going to be on larger institutions that have large boilers buried deep in the middle of the building, or maybe old residential high rises with boilers embedded in the basement or in the middle of the building, that they have no other way to get to the outside. Right. They have to use that chimney, and those tend to be a lot longer and taller. But just in, if we're talking about domestic water heaters here and there, it's not going to be a cost impact.
I could see that in a single family home. If you have I'm thinking of my house, which used to have a chimney like this, now removed. But if I had wanted to just replace my atmospheric vent water heater, probably would have had to run a B vent, and that would add some cost. And I could use the chimney as a chase, but it was a dedicated chimney just for space and water heating. But I'm not sure how to quantify that, but that could be another example in a residential setting, single family home setting.
So how about limited application to larger institutional installations and some residential. Would you agree that because there has to be an inspection, how many people are seeing one such as the water heater Kevin just talked about? I'm hearing most times they say, oh, that's nasty, line it. But the
Right.
inspection was going to make it.
Yeah.
The inspection will say you got to do it anyway.
Most likely.
I agree.
So it would be a very limited installation that is one that A isn't lined and B is still in good shape.
Mhm.
So
Good point. That's a good point, Mark. In terms of cost impact, yes.
So I would say more limited to larger institutional systems that haven't already updated their systems. Like a few of the remaining schools that still have some boilers that came off of old battleships and they're sitting in there.
Right. Well, and to drive that point home, Mark, that paragraph, unsafe chimneys, indicates that if it's not lined, it probably will be, because it says shall be repaired, rebuilt, lined, relined. So, yeah. If it's not lined, it's probably going to have to be anyway. I don't see how you'd have an exception to that.
So would we say a very limited locations, just not many that aren't going to, and I think that might be part of why they said it's outdated.
Well, and I wonder, going back to that same paragraph, if there would be any impact, because if you're saying it's unsafe because it's not lined, then you're going to line it, and that's just code. I mean, if you're taking away the exception, I suppose that is a change in cost, but yeah, I don't know. It's
To
complex.
the building officials, how many times do you go out and see a water heater in a basement being replaced that is you're just saying it's just been reconnected without anybody looking at the chimneys?
Well, what I'm finding is that when they're replaced, it's 90%, efficient appliance, and they're having to vent it correctly, so they're not reusing the chimney. I can't tell you, it's probably been 15 years since I've seen one replaced using an existing chimney.
Right. So probably back to the point of more institutional stuff then.
And that did happen to be a high school.
Yeah. Do you think you have enough of an answer, Andy?
I think so. And just to sanity check something, I just did a quick Google search on how much it costs to line a chimney, and it's a pretty significant range, but it says 2,500 to 10,000. Does that sound right to just a sort of like a literal random Google search? Sound as a decent, at least, starting point in terms of how much we'd be talking if we were talking to line a chimney to put one of these, to upgrade one of these.
Well, I think the lining they're talking about would be like fire clay instead of a vent of some type, or a chimney, metal chimney.
Right. Which would be cheaper by far.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but both of those are considered lining the chimney.
Right.
So for the replacement slinky liner, B-vent type inside of a chimney, single family home, basement to roof, 25 feet installed, probably
$3,000.
okay.
That's what I see people doing out there already, is, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
That will be would only be triggered if somebody had a really good 1930s. The grout is still holding up, which is,
Right.
So ready to move on?
Sure.
Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 pieces left, right? Venting system terminal clearances. Through the wall vent terminal clearance distances have been placed in a new table with corresponding figure for ease of use. I think we're looking at C503.8.
Nice.
So we now have a table with some exceptions
So why
about
is,
combustion air intakes. Let's take a look at the first the table for a second. So it has I got you. So different clearances to different materials, openings, corners, etc. And if we scroll down a little bit more to the figure and then zoom in just a little bit.
so basically it looks like the one out of the manufacturer's book.
And I thought we always said per manufacturer's book.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they're doing this because they pretty much tell you all that in the book itself. Are we clarifying the clarified?
Oh, but this could be for more, not the you have sidewall vent for decorative fireplaces.
True.
And I think this is just clarifying, because I believe the language is still saying that, yes, when it comes to class 3 and 4, termination and everything is for per manufacturer instructions. I'm going to try and find that section while you guys look this over.
And I was going to say for note 8, or H rather, with a 15-foot clearance above a gas regulator. We don't have that requirement for our meter placement guide. Well, to be specific, you can have a combustion air intake within, as long as it's not within 3 feet of the regulator. Which I don't think is what they're showing. They're showing vent terminals and air supplies, which is different. Although we do allow an operable window within, as long as it's more than 3 feet away. Well, and a vent terminal as well.
Yeah. A lot of it's just referring to manufacturer's appliance manufacturer. Except for some of the gas.
you need the TV down next door?
I think this one's going to take a little extra, just relearning how you find the locations and distances for building officials in public, but
A lot of that stuff's in the manual.
is it possible to show the current 503.8 next to the new? I don't feel I'm getting the full. So it starts with venting system locations and has 4 categories. And then when you get to type 4, we're almost there, guys. And then we can let our staff go to lunch. Apologies from me for letting this go late. So what they've done is kind of simplified. If you'll notice parts 1, 2, 3, 4 in the existing code. They're simplifying 503.8 to follow the table, follow the diagram, versus trying to differentiate between the different vent types when you're talking about
And manufacturers.
venting terminations, yes, and manufacturers and things like
Yep.
that. I think we're just winding up with a different look to the same thing.
I mean, having a graphic is very handy.
And the graph used to be in, you could go to Appendix CC, and that a different version of that graph would be there. But now we've got something that shows a lot more conditions and making sure that you don't have eaves or overhangs, you know, where the,
Yeah, well, something that replicates the manual better, because I have found it's easier just to go to the manual and read this sort of thing.
That's what I do when I do my inspections. I just
Yeah,
plug them
sure.
in.
So I think it's good.
Yeah, I think it is too.
all right.
Especially
Yeah.
if they didn't have the manual.
We have a thumbs up across the board on this one then. Just clarification, no cost impact, correct?
Yep.
Seems like it.
All right, now we're going to go back to C 503.10.7 vent connector junctions. We're down to 3 things, people, and
And I have a quick one.
we have to go. Sorry to ask about bringing up the I think that was pretty much implied that you had to do this anyway. I don't
Well,
know.
how else do you do it?
W connectors.
Do you
S
tape it together,
connectors.
P-trap?
Ah,
Oh, my.
just clarifying language, everyone. Do you think we need to really dig into this one too much?
Yeah.
Have an okay. We're moving on to 618.6. Okay, and clarifies the intent to prohibit pulling return air from a mechanical room.
I thought we were already doing that.
I think, yes, I think this is just,
Clarifying. Yeah, I've had this problem before.
Makes sense.
Yeah, why would you do that? Sounds dangerous to me.
all right, so we have a thumbs up, just clarification of intent. Now, commercial cooking appliances. Deletes an unnecessary exception for commercial cooking appliances within dwelling units.
Makes sense, eh?
I could. So this, the only question on this one would be for those people who are doing home businesses for kitchens, if they're, you know, putting in an appliance that isn't dual listed and they're actually putting in a something that would be, and they are putting in even a type 1 hood or something in there. That's the only question I would have, is sometimes a caterer or someone has, you know, a full commercial kitchen at home, but would they have type 1 equipment that wouldn't be double listed? Would they have, say, a deep fat fryer or something? Or I don't know whether the building officials are seeing anything like that out there.
I think this is just keeping, you know, residential builders from becoming purists to say, I don't want a commercial style appliance. I want the real thing. And I think that's a good idea to prevent that. I mean, you could buy a commercial style residential range for $12,000.
Yeah, I agree. Only professionals trained at McDonald's should use a commercial appliance.
That's right.
Yeah. So I've seen high-end residential designs replicating commercial kitchens and stuff, but I think if the individual was an actual business, like caterer, or had a business, then you would look at dividing your house into a business side and a residential side.
I think health code even requires that.
Yeah.
You can't be a caterer out of your regular kitchen.
So this one makes sense to me.
Yeah, me too.
All right. And no cost.
And also, if you go to the next code section on domestic appliances, it says to be in a dwelling unit, it has to be listed for domestic cooking operations too.
Right.
So.
All right. To everyone on the committee, I think we go back to Andy now for a wrap up, correct? And apologies, Laura.
I had one more quick thing.
Okay.
In table, actually it's section C 416.1.
Can you say that again?
Yeah, C416.1. It refers to table C14.1, which is above, and it's for supportive piping, not for the sizing of piping. And I think that's a mistake in the model code. And I think what they're shooting for, if I could share my screen for a second.
Yes, please. Let me unshare. How do I unshare? Does anybody?
It's hard.
Yeah.
But you
Sometimes
could
it
just
gets,
share over me.
okay, let's try that. Oh, no, I can't. Let's see.
Oh, weird.
You have to.
Oh,
actually-
here it is. Stop share.
Yeah, the button often disappears. Okay. So I pulled this from the California code, but it's referring to how do you size gas piping for, like they say, M1H communities. And this, I think this is what that is trying to refer to, that section, not how do you support it, how do you size it. But I couldn't find this anywhere else except for NFPA.
Sounds like an errata needs to be done.
Yeah. And I could send this to you, Mark and Laura, if that's helpful.
Yeah, I might have missed something. Let's see. And you're saying it was like that in the 19.
Can you still see my screen?
Yeah.
So yeah, there's the reference. It's referencing this table, but that's not what this section is about. It's for sizing of piping to a like a mobile home or a vehicle park kind of deal. But there is no table in this code that tells you how to design that.
Yeah. That's showing
That
me.
does say that, doesn't it?
Yeah, even in the 19.
Yeah, it does.
No.
It's telling you to support your piping for being sized. Good catch.
I wonder
Mark-
if the 14 was okay.
And Mark, you're on mute. Oh, intentionally. Okay.
You didn't want to hear me.
He's probably like, "Are you kidding me, Laura?"
You didn't want to hear me. All right. Yes, once upon a time, we had a table from 2010 that has disappeared.
Huh.
I have found it. Yes, there is a minimum demand factors for calculating gas piping systems in manufactured structures parks. We do actually have that table. So we have lost connection to it. I could show it to the group, but Kevin, is yours still up?
Yeah.
I'm having to slide some things around.
From NFPA 501A.
Manufacturer structure for.
I think I pulled this table from the California mechanical. Actually, yeah.
We have a slightly different numbers, but would the group be okay with bringing back in the ancient table from 2010 to actually correct the book again? Since this, I believe, is probably aligning with our dwelling, or excuse me, our mobile home code. I would imagine that's where
Right.
this has come from. Could we just get an approval to, yes, please bring back the correct table and install it?
Sounds good.
And with that, you've got that as a note? I'm going to put it in mine.
Yep, I got it.
Sometimes things disappear and it just keeps, where did I place that?
Oh no.
Cool.
Okay, yeah, I found it. All right.
Okay. And with that, I think we turn it back to Andy, and I'm sorry, Laura, for having this go over. We should have taken a lunch break, but
Oh,
we're,
no,
we're
I'm
wrapping
fine.
it up, folks.
Okay, I'm not sure I have a ton of wrap up. I'm pretty confident I captured the various fiscal and economic impacts such as they were along the way. I'm happy to go through them really quick if we want to, but there wasn't a lot. That's I'm not going to go back over the stuff from the last meeting, but for this meeting, let's see, what do we got here? There was the removal of the approval language to potentially ease the process on building departments in chapter 4. Some minimal impact from the marking with tags of the primary and secondary drainage piping. Not a lot. Next. And then, yeah, the chimney lining was the only other big one. Most of the stuff, it was no fiscal economic impact. And so, yeah, I don't think that there's a whole lot left to review beyond that, other than, thanking everybody for making the time. Unless you think I'm mixing something, Mark. If you think I'm missing something that I should be talking about, just, speak up or.
No, we just want to make sure that you are
I'm
good
happy.
on all the fiscal stuff and have anything else other than the general recommendation is, there are a lot of Oregon amendments where we do things with, definitions and the like, that we don't make you run through every one of them. Oregon amendments will still carry through unless we, chose to take some out. We've gone through the significant changes and so I'd like to thank everybody again. Sorry about all the delays and working through this, schedules during, and having to meet with everybody via camera, and having to get yelled at, unmute your mic or whatever. So if there's anything else, yes, I would like to thank you on behalf of the division. We really appreciate having our groups that, looking to volunteers and people out there in industry so we can get this good feedback, get that second opinion. That just doesn't sound right. It's been great, folks. Thank you very much. Unless you have something else to say, I'd like to let you get on with your day and say thank you.
Sounds good. Pleasure to serve.
Yep. Great. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Troy, Kevin, Jeff,
Thank you.
and everybody else. Bye, folks.
Take care.
Bye-bye.